Another bat the Guardians could have used comes off the board, so now we're forced to evaluate the offseason, give out grades, talk extensions, and trade deadline on a mailbag episode of Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in, Cleveland Guardians fans. Hey, and thanks for hanging out with us for the next half hour of the day and commiserating and, I think I have the right use there, commiserating and being miserable when things don't go our way. It hasn't been our day, our month, or even our year, or even our off season. We're still here for you. We are Locked On Guardians, the only daily podcast on your Cleveland Guardians that covers them every day, from the majors, the minors, the draft, and everything in between. Now part of the Locked On, now part number one sports podcast network on the Locked On Sports Podcast Network. I'm Justin Lada, one of your two co-hosts for the last 3 years and counting, going into year 4 with my friend and coach Jeff Ellis, and I'm starting year 19 covering the Guardians minor league system as a prospect writer and editor on the Guardians.
As you mentioned, I'm Jeff Ellis. I've been here since lockdown. Started with baseball 7 years ago. Before that, I was a national writer at Scotland 24/7, focused on prospects in the draft. I want to thank you for making today's episode your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts, as well as a big shout out to each and one of our everydayers out there. Special shout out to Chris Swan, had a very nice YouTube comment. Brian Hackney said he's a new listener. Welcome to the show. Disco Golf had a fun YouTube comment as well. So shout outs all around.
Yes, thanks to everybody who, again, makes it worth showing up here 5 days a week to talk Cleveland Guardians baseball when nothing good is happening. Although I guess we could say that's disrespectful to Colby Allard, who did play a good role for the Guardians last year. He played an important role. Even if we thought it wasn't sustainable, it was still an important role for them.
We're not Angels fans here. It's not like it's actively detrimental, or even, like the White Sox are having an okay offseason, but again, point out that like they managed to be in a negative situation with their biggest star and have one of the worst owners in baseball. Like, I know people get mad at this, but it's like, things didn't go their way today, and I'm not shocked by it, but like
all off season, they didn't go the way all off season. Let's be honest.
It could still, I don't know. I guess it's because being here in Cleveland, it's like grass is always greener. Like you've learned if you're a Browns fan with Jimmy Haslam. It can always get worse. You can always have a meddling owner that makes situations worse. It's a team that wins often. Like, I don't know. I have a hard time getting too negative with this team when it's like, hey, proof is in the pudding. I'm in my 40s, and I heard enough stories from my dad in his 70s about how he spent decades with this team being unwatchable.
It's okay to want better. That's what I'll say.
It is.
It's okay. It's okay to want better.
100%. I'm just like I
my dad said to the same bad teams.
Yeah. It's like I can't get too low because it's like the success still weighs me above. So I'm like, yeah, this has not been the offseason I wanted, but at the end of the day, I still ride with this front office. So I still don't have like any real, like, I can't sit there and be like quite as negative just because I'm like, what they do works. Like, as much as people out there want to say it doesn't, you don't keep making the postseason if it doesn't.
Not with the way this team operates. No.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a lot of questions about that kind of thing today on the show. It is a mailbag edition of Locked On Guardians. Later in the show, we'll answer some questions about trade deadline prospects. Yes, we're already looking ahead to trade deadline acquisitions. We hope, fingers crossed. Front office frustration. We have some questions about that, and ownership questions. So we'll get into those. Coming up in a little bit, we'll discuss which player makes sense to talk extension with next. Hint, it's not Stephen Kwan. I know someone's going to say that it's not Kwan. We're leading off the mailbag edition of the show. How do we grade the Guardians offseason? So that's right in Jeff's wheelhouse, since he loves to give out grades prematurely and also, is riding with the front office, as he just said. So that's from John O. Jim Bowden gave the Guardians a D this offseason. He also put him in the NL Central in his writing. So
then it's an A, because it's Jim. If Jim Bowden thinks it's a D, it'd clearly be an A.
I mean, fair. Anything Jim Bowden does is usually the opposite. I mean, again, he did put the Guardians in the NL Central in his writing. So
I mean, it's an incomplete. It's still not done. Like, this time a year ago, things still happen. So for me, it's an incomplete until we get beyond this. Like, I can't really grade until we see the full picture. So
I'm at least to this day. Maybe we won't give the final grade, but we'll give a progress report, I guess.
Nope, that's not how you do with teaching anymore. It's you give your grades at the end. No.
Oh, I had progress reports as a kid. What the heck?
Yeah, they don't do. There's no midterm thing.
I would have been grounded a lot less as a kid if we didn't have progress reports.
I mean, you can go and look at the grades in whatever online gradebook tool, but any school I've been at hasn't done a progress report.
All right. Well, I'm from that era, so I'm going to give a progress report. I'm going to give them a C-. Like, they did enough to address the bullpen issue, which was something they needed to do. But yeah, offensively, not enough. So I'm not gonna ignore what they did at the bullpen, because I think Sean Armstrong was a great signing, and I'm excited to see what comes of Holderman and Palette and Connor Brogdon. I think those guys will serve valuable as depth. So, and then they brought Colby Allard back, Pedro Avila. They're going to have some depth, so that's good. But yeah, they did nothing to help this team offensively externally. So speaking of offense, then we'll move on to the next question: is when is the right time to sign Kyle Manzardo? So there isn't a Quan-like problem, or is he a next Josh Naylor they will ride to free agency?
He's a first baseman. They're never going to give a first baseman extension. It's just, that's the market. I know it's not what people want to hear, but and especially like for as good as Kyle Manzardo was, like there's some ups and downs in the data. Like maybe you'd consider it after next offseason. I bet they would never give a first baseman an extension in general because of relative value to the position. But his profile is definitely someone that we got to see. I believe in him. I believe they have a big three right now, but there's enough there where I'm like, I definitely wouldn't have talked to him this offseason. You wouldn't have been on.
No, this offseason isn't the right time. I mean, when they're going to extend anybody, just as a rule of thumb, it's always going to be before they get to arbitration. And who knows how that's going to change in the next CBA? Will arbitration come sooner? Will they alter that as a way to dance around, the salary cap? Who knows? So yeah, this is definitely not the offseason you do with Kyle Manzardo.
And he's got like first 5 more years, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So yeah, he can't even hit free agency until he's like 31.
Yeah, right. So, and honestly, a first base DH is not the kind of player you want to be getting 32, 33, 34 age-wise. That's a free agent you bring in like a Josh Bell, which, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's not the kind of guy you want to go out and get the end gears there. I think the question is, do you think Manzardo is going to be good enough during his arbitration years that you want to have some cost certainty in those and then get a year or two of free agency on the back? And that's what it looks like to me. It's not necessarily how long do you want to lock it in. It's do you think he's going to elevate his game so much to the point that if you lock him in sooner than later, you avoid some overpaying in arbitration if things rise to that level? And I don't see that happening for him. Like, I like Kyle Manzardo, but I don't see him playing that well, especially with the lack of defense. And he's not, first base is not a good defensive position to get paid for. He's also not a good defender. So I don't think you have to worry about that. So I'm not of the opinion that Kyle Manzardo is going to be a guy that breaks so much in his arbitration years that you want to lock in cost certainty. I'm fine going year to year with him at this point. Plus, you got Rafi Velasquez, you got CJ Kafis. Who knows what they're going to do? They've got all the leverage here, so you could go to him and say, we'll lock you in, but it's got to be after this season if you're going to do it. It's not right now. It's after this season if they both feel like he's on the right track.
The one thing I will say though is like the one thing what will bring up his arbitration numbers is power. Like it's hardware and home runs. It's the 2 H's, so there is a chance like he's winning any home run season. No, he's more likely than not won't. But like if he keeps hitting home runs, it will cause his price to get quite high.
Yeah, I mean, if you get to 30 home runs, that is going to drive your value up. And like I said, that's also part of extensions too. It's locking in cost certainty. So do you think that he's a guy who's going to hit enough home runs to cash in arbitration that they want to lock in the price while it's better? Do you think that's part of the equation here?
I mean, potentially. Like I said, I also just think positionally it's going to be an issue.
He's in the best shape of his life, though. He gained 14 pounds of muscle. Look, spring training hasn't even officially started. We've already got our first official best shape of his life comment. So we're off to a great start, right? So lock him in now if he's in the best shape of his life. That's what I say. No?
That's fine.
The last extension they did with the player like that was Travis Hafner, and we were talking the other day how that went, and it just did not go well. So
just because of health, he kept hitting. If people forget, he still hit.
He did. He kept hitting. He just was not on the field. And Manzardo so far has been healthy. So, I don't think that was wood. I knocked on wood. I don't have any wood around here to knock on. So, which prospects would we like to use to upgrade at the deadline? And why are some of them different than past prospects? We are going to discuss that in a question next. If you've ever hired someone before, it's not about finding someone who will actually take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background that can help your business, help your team take that step forward. And if you want candidates who are matching what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move you need to make. Instead of hoping the right person by chance comes across your post, Indeed is going to help you match with quality candidates by boosting job listings to people who fit your specific criteria, skills, certifications, and location. Look, when the Guardians are looking for that perfect fit, right? They're a little bit picky, but they also are looking for very specific things like platoon roles, right? They maybe should have used Indeed to find the right candidate because they sure as heck didn't find what they were looking for this offseason. Here's a stat that says it all, though. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. If you're hiring, spend less time searching, more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of Locked On Guardians will get $75 in job credits to help you get the job premium status it deserves with Indeed.com/podcast, Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. As always, thanks for hanging out with us here on Locked On Guardians and making us part of your daily routine. We do love talking Guardians baseball with you every single day, and we are honored and privileged that you let us do that and rant about it sometimes and rant back at us. We appreciate that too. So if you are living with the Cleveland Guardians every day through frustration and celebration, level it up. Join the Everydayer Club. Get Locked On Guardians with no interruptions. Members only Discord access. We can talk with us, other Locked On hosts from MLB, other sports, Cavs, Browns, Buckeyes. They're all in there. Other MLB teams for $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to LockedOnGuardians.supercast.com or check the show notes for the link for more. All right, Jeff, our next question comes from your buddy Aaron. The Guardians, Aaron is usually a pretty positive guy, we'll say. He does like to make a joke, but he's usually pretty positive. They have managed to even make Aaron jaded. So pick one under the radar prospect you'd hate to give up at a potential trade deadline deal to shore up the offense, but who are we kidding? They won't shore up the offense. Man, they've even gotten to Aaron. Poor Aaron. I'm sorry.
I'll say, I did appreciate today as I was reading some of the stuff about the Giants prospects, and one of our favorite under the radar guys is now a really hot prospect for the Giants in Bresnahan. Like, that's one thing.
Oh, weird. I wonder who said that before.
We got, you in particular got hammered by people for prospect hug. You got him. Well, we were both like, hey, it's okay. Clemmy, goodbye. Jose Tena, goodbye. We're okay with that. Bresnahan, we're like, oh, this could come back. And that one does seem a little painful. But who is the under the radar? Why don't you go first so I can just kind of stare at my list for a second and see who is my guy who's maybe not a top 15 guy that would make me a little, if there's anyone there.
Under the radar for to add a bat. Well, pitching's always going to be popular at the deadline. People always want to acquire young pitching. If they don't turn someone like Parker Messick into a bat, if they decide they want to hold on to him and keep that, because as of right now, I think he's penciled in to be the first guy from AAA, the way the rotation stacks up for me. If I had to pick it under the radar. Yeah, you're right. It wouldn't be under the radar. I think it could be Josh Hartle. I don't know if he's under the radar necessarily, but if he has a good year at AA this year, if he builds off of what he did last year, his trade value should be much higher and is someone potentially they could use to add a bat in the at the trade deadline, I would think, because again, pitching is always going to be the best commodity you can trade. Pitching prospects. I want to say someone like Cooper Ingle because but Cooper Ingle's not really under the radar either because he's always at AAA. But
he's been on the top 100 prospect list of points.
Yeah, it's someone I wouldn't mind moving. Yeah, so I'll say Josh Hartle.
I was going to say Yorman Gomez or Uniker Caceres, just because those guys are, Uniker is starting to get some love, so maybe he doesn't count, but Yorman doesn't get as much talk. And I do think that he's going to be, if there's someone we need to fill in the bullpen, I just still can't. I want to love. I want to believe in love, but I can't when it comes to Daniel Espino yet with that health history. So I think that the guy that I think could end up being a dynamic reliever from that pen, like as early as this year, is Yorman Gomez. So I think he could be the guy that if a team thinks, hey, he can still start, we can work with him on a third pitch, then maybe that's the guy.
Yeah, I mean, there's him. You could maybe even flip Franklin Gomez if things go well with him. You just acquired him. Rafe Schlesinger was interesting last year for Lake County. I think he's a reliever, but the stuff is there. So I can see that as well. A lot of people seem to like the stuff of Jackson Humphreys and Caden Favors. Yeah,
Favors does have a lot of fans.
I'm not as big on those guys, but I know people like them. I mean, you got to have Aiden Major coming back from Tommy John this year. Maybe people will be interested in Will Hines. I mean, I think that was a money saver pick because wasn't that was he exactly slot, Will Hines?
No, he was like a little under, but he was still a 6-figure guy, so he was still somebody with a significant amount of value.
Maybe you could use him. I don't know if people really like him. We'll see what happens there. Speaking of prospects, Jeff, we've got a question from Jordan M here, and it is, what makes a guy like Angel Genao different from a guy like Rocchio or let me save it. Rocchio, Arias, or Angel Martinez? I would say the very obvious thing about Angel Genao that makes him different than Rocchio and Arias and Martinez. First of all, Arias wasn't a switch hitter. But to me, Genao is a good runner. Rocchio has always been a little slower. We've seen the data on that. He's not a great runner.
Rocchio thinks he's an Olympian, though.
He does think he's a great runner. It's very strange. But no, Genao is a really good runner. I would say he's a 60. So on the scouting scale of 20 to 80, he's a 60, which makes him a plus runner. He also hits the ball harder. I don't know if he hits the ball like, Gabriel Arias.
He's got the exit velos.
He does. He just doesn't have the approach. Genao's got a better approach than Arias. He hits the ball harder than Rocchio. He's not as aggressive as Martinez, although I will say I do think there is an element of aggressiveness to Genao's profile. Like, I could very much see Genao being similar to an Angel Martinez. I remember when Angel kind of had a breakout at Lake County a couple of years ago, I was like, okay, this is something, right? And Genao kind of had his like big flashy season at Lake County, and then he was okay at AA, but he was hurt. So we'll see. But he's got better exit velocities than Angel Martinez did. The approach is the only thing. Like, it's a better approach. He swings and he makes more contact than Arias, right? And he hits the ball harder than Rocchio, and he has a better exit velo than Martinez. So he does he does everything better than those guys in some area, I would say.
I mean, I think for me the standout is the exit velo, which is the only guy who had his exit velo and potential for power was Arias. And the issue with Arias was always contact, and he's had better contact rates and lower chase rates than Arias. So it's like you take that Arias profile, he's got a good arm, better than Martinez, better than not as good as Arias because no one does. So it's like you're kind of taking like the Arias profile, but sanding off some of the rough edges in terms of contact and chase. So that's why I think he's a better prospect, because you're getting better tools than like Rocchio and Martinez, but you don't have quite the devastatingly bad chase rate and contact issues that plagued Arias throughout.
Right, yeah. Genao does make better contact, more contact. The other two guys just don't have the thump in their bat. I'm not saying Genao is going to be a guy who hits 20 home runs, but
he might get there 1 year or two. Like, he might have a few years he gets to 20.
Yeah, I could see 15 to 20. I mean, he had 38 doubles in 2024 plus 10 homers. So he had 48. He had 52 extra base hits as a was he 20 years old in 2024? That's pretty impressive. That many extra base hits across two levels. I think you give him a little bit of a mulligan for what he did last year because of the shoulder issue and starting late. Is he going to be as good defender as Arias? No, nobody in this organization I don't think is, honestly. No. But he's still going to be a guy who I think is a solid defender. He also has a good, like you said, has a good arm in his own right. Whereas Rocchio doesn't have the arm to meet for shortstop. It's just very average. And Genao is quicker. I think he's more athletic than Rocchio. So I do think there is real helium there. I think there's a little bit more. So we'll see. I mean, like I was never as high on Rocchio as I am on Genao. We were high on Arias because of the tools. And then Martinez, like I did buy into the breakout a little bit. But again, exit velocities for Martinez and the defense at short were never there. So there are a lot of good things. Yeah. All right. So coming up, we still have to get questions about front office frustration, ownership concerns, all to be answered on the rest of today's Locked On Guardians. Baseball season's around the corner. You know what that means? It's also tax season. It doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is actually going to make it easier to hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted expert, local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. Look, I just got all of my paperwork for taxes right. I've got multiple freelance gigs. I've got a lot of complicated stuff on my plate. I'm not doing it alone. I'm going to check out TurboTax because I need help to do all of this stuff. I need a local expert to explain to me all the stuff that comes along with freelance W-2s and 1099. So I don't have to do it myself. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate. Get back to living life. Visit TurboTax.com/lockedon to book your appointment today. Hit the bell on YouTube to get notified of whenever episodes of Locked On Guardians are posted or reactions to any news that may or may not happen, as well as other prospect content we'll do. We get into our top prospect series and auto download on all your favorite audio platforms. So you get the show coming right into your feed, wherever you listen. So that way you can get ready for spring training in the season with us. And if you're enjoying Guardians Talk with us, you want to go one-on-one instead of the Discord, we do still have the Insiders Club available. So we text with the community daily. We ask for mailbag questions as we did in this show. So thanks to all the insiders there. You can check out joinsubtext.com/LockedOnGuardians to join in the conversation that way as well. Plenty of ways to hang out with us when the show is not going on. All right, let's see. We got a front office question. So we do have a frustrated front office person here. Not actually working in the Guardians front office, but someone who might be a little bit frustrated. And it's one of my favorite commenters, one of our favorite everydayers is Jeff, or better known as Cheeks Malone, one of the best YouTube handles I've ever seen. All right. Are Antonetti and Chernoff getting a little annoying? It feels like they're a little arrogant, like a smug self of accomplishments, because they are the extreme couponers of the league. I think there's a little bit of tongue in cheek in this question, but I thought it was worth answering because I don't think Jeff Ellis, not Jeff Cheeks Malone.
McNeary, right? McNeary.
McNeary, yeah. Wow, just dox him like that. Good for you. Excuse me. Made me laugh. I think it's a little tongue in cheek, but you know, this team has been called prospect hoarders before by the rest of the league. I don't think these two guys, Chernoff and Antonetti, came into the offseason saying, no, we don't need to add anything. We're going to sit on our heels. We don't need to add anybody to this roster. We're good. I mean, Chernoff, surprisingly, this was a surprising quote that he said back in October, that he knew that the offense wasn't good and the outfield wasn't good and they had to improve. He didn't say how, he just said they had to. I don't think it was their plan going into the offseason to do nothing to address it. I just think, again, guys that were available for platoon roles decided, no, I'm better than that. And they took other opportunities, or they
didn't want to come here. Like, that's the thing. We also know Ref Schneider did not want to come to Cleveland. Right.
So there's that. You can't force that. For some reason, they felt like Brendan Donovan wasn't a good fit because he was left-handed. If he was right-handed, he would have been a better fit for them, but he's not. So, you know, they missed out on a couple of pieces, or at least one piece that we'll talk about here at the end of the show. But I'm not as frustrated with them only because I don't think that was their plan coming into the offseason. It's just that's the way that the ball kind of bounced for them. And that's, you know, you can't always dictate the market. Like, you know, you can't always decide what the best price is or what's available to you. And you don't want to overpay for something that's not worth it just because you have to have something.
And you also can't dictate what other teams like. You know, we talked about this back in the day with the Sean Murphy trade. Like, Oakland had their heart set on Estuary Ruiz and made a terrible trade by giving up basically William Contreras for him. You know, we can't even say, like, who's to say that this conversation with Giangello, Singente, we knew they had this discussion a month ago. They came back to it. They liked him enough that this is a guy that they spent months kind of heeing and hawing and taking out their offers, and they ended up making him the centerpiece. And there is some room to compare him to Liam Doyle, who was their first round pick a year ago, who might also be a reliever, but has kind of that exciting upside. So it's kind of one of the problems is like a lot of people are like, well, what would the Cleveland equivalent of this trade be? And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know exactly what this team wanted, and it's not the guys that they traded for. Like, that's an impossible statement. I understand why that question gets asked. And I will say, I feel like there's a lot of displacement. There's a lot of people who are frustrated with the offseason who then just naturally blame the front office when, like I said, we know it's, I hate to be this person, but like we hear from a lot of different sources, and just a very bottom line statement is a lot of players don't have interest in coming. Like, and it's not against the front office. It's, they don't want to come to the Midwest. They don't want to, you have to pay a surcharge to get extra talent out here, and that makes it hard. It's an unfortunate, on top of being a small market, on top of, not having some of the other numbers. It's like, it's not a place. This isn't the 90s where like it was it seemed like players were excited to come because it was one of the premier destinations. Unfortunately, it's just not that anymore.
Yeah, it's a different era of free agency.
Yeah.
The money is exploded, but the money has exploded for, as more teams are losing their TV deal with FanDuel, the money just overwhelmingly goes to TV deals like the Dodgers, the Mets, the Yankees, and I think the Red Sox have their own. So
yeah, and the Blue Jays, of course.
Yeah, the Blue Jays have
I'll be
their
curious
own.
to see if the Braves make their own. I have a feeling there's a chance they might just create their own network this offseason.
I could see that too. So yeah, I don't know. Speaking of ownership and all things related to money, we do have a question from Kevin about David Blitzer, and I think you and I might have talked about this the other day. And it's, why would David Blitzer want to take over this team next year? Do you think there's a chance he backs out? I don't think he's going to back out, but I do think he could at the end of this season, going into next year, can enforce or pick up the option to become the majority owner of the Guardians. I think he's very much going to wait until the CBA is worked out. I don't think there's any reason for him to say, yeah, I'm going to enforce my option to buy the majority stake of the team right now. He's going to wait till that CBA is signed so he knows what he's getting himself into. So let's say he's going to back out, but he's definitely going to wait to see what the CBA looks like so he knows what he's on the hook for.
I think honestly, he could back out from being the majority owner. I think in that way you could say yes. I could see a situation because David Blitzer's got a multiple. He owns a lot of teams, and he owns a lot of teams with Josh Harris, and Josh Harris has seen his name in the news in some negative light recently, and that's going to put some additional weight on if Josh Harris is forced to sell things off. Blitzer might have to buy other shares of other sports teams. So if the CBA doesn't go well, and let's be honest, they spent 3-4 years between Sherman and Blitzer trying to find a minority owner, and no one wanted it. And if things go not as great, either the CBA doesn't go the way he wants, or we have both you and I, and even like people in Cleveland talked about. There's been some like trying to figure out a village, even though there's not a lot of room around the stadium. It's like if they can't get the village, if the CBA doesn't go right, if Josh Harris is kind of forced to sell his shares to Blitzer on certain teams they own together. Any one of those things could make it where like, no, we're just going to stay a minority owner. And if someone else comes along, they can be the majority owner. I would say there is a chance of backing out in terms of the majority, especially with the way the TV contracts are falling apart. It's silly right now to buy majority ownership. Like valuations, they never go down, but they might not increase at the rate they've been going. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if we saw him decide to, in the end, stay at the position he has.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. That's a position I think is very fair. All right, let's wrap it up with one more question. This is one we sort of addressed before, but I think it's good to get back to, is from our buddy Nunzio. He wants to know all there is to know, Jeff, about Dane Myers not being a Cleveland Guardian. He wants the explanation, gets the explanation about the right-handed free agent outfielders going elsewhere, but nobody asked him about Dane Myers and all that kind of stuff. It was a good trade cost for the Reds to get him, too. So this is the one Nunzio didn't get. And quite frankly, you and I both said the same thing. I unless they just weren't having conversation with the Marlins, unless they weren't aware that the Marlins were interested in making Dane Myers available for the right price. That's the only I could think of. I don't know if that's really an excuse, but especially when you know that the best avenue might be to improve your offense by trading for someone if you can't get, Ref Schneider to relocate or guys to take limited at bats. When you trade for Dane Myers, they don't have a choice. It's play or don't play. You have to be in on those calls. You've got to exhaust every option. And that seems like an option they missed.
Well, I mean, we just got to be honest with this. It's just very clear the Marlins wanted a former Kalamazoo Mac Daddy. That's the summer league player as these Kalamazoo Mac Daddies. Ethan Adal is really, he looks like a depth player. He was an 8th round pick. I didn't look at his signing bonus. That's who they got for him. 8th round pick in 2023 who had a 652 OPS in AA, a 774 in high A. And that's when he's 22 and 23. He's not an exciting prospect at all. So it feels like Dane Myers went very, very, very cheaply. So it just kind of feels like, I don't know if Cleveland, I was trying to think, Cleveland really hasn't done anything with the Marlins. Maybe it's just a situation where they knew someone there. There's someone in the Marlins to Reds front office that made that work. But yeah, it's the player traded is really unexciting to me, and that's not a knock on Ethan Odell or any of his family. If anyone listens, I'm sure he's a great kid. He just hasn't done much, and he was he's a 6th round pick, not an 8th round pick. Like I said, the most interesting thing is he played for some league team called the Mac Daddies. That's what I got. So I think it's just communication or, lack thereof. Maybe they were talking about a bigger deal and it fell apart between the Marlins. Maybe there was something else, and sometimes those big deals fall apart, and then they discuss some smaller parts that were involved. Maybe there was a bigger deal involving Dane Myers and someone else, and that didn't work out, but they were like, well, we've already talked about Dane Myers. Let's at least get this one across the finish line. That sometimes happens.
Yeah. I mean, Peter Bendix is the GM now in charge of the Marlins and would have been around with the Rays when the Guardians made some trades with the Rays. So there should have been some familiarity there. The last time I think the Guardians and the Marlins talked was when Jose Ramirez, it was up in the air whether or not he'd sign that extension in 2022.
What's Josh Bell trade? Josh Bell.
Oh yeah, that was before Bendix, right? Though.
Yes, that was the last time with the Marlins.
Yeah, so Kim Ng was still or no, it was whoever was between Kim Ng and Peter Bendix. They had like a stopgap person, I think. I could be wrong because I think Kim Ng was trying to keep them going towards the playoffs, and they tried to hire Peter Bendix over her, and even though that she was doing a good job, I thought. So I don't know. Yeah, there is the Josh Bell thing. So they've been in communication in recent years, depending on who's been in the front office. So I don't know. I mean, the Reds haven't had a new GM in forever. The Rays have, or the Marlins have. I'm trying to think if the Rays and the Reds have had any deals, but that would have involved Peter Bendix. But Cleveland and Peter Bendix should have a relationship from all the deals that they did in Tampa. So yeah, very odd they weren't involved there. And again, that's an opportunity missed in terms of not overturning every stone possible. But it was early when they made the trade, so the Reds were smart to jump when they did, because for them, he doesn't need to play every day, and Cleveland wouldn't need to play every day either. But the Reds got him at a very low cost when there were still options on the board. Maybe the Marlins could have gotten more for him if they had held out.
I think so. 100%.
To the end. Yeah, with the way the market went. So yeah, that's unfortunate. So yeah, that's one where I think you have to give them a pretty poor review on, unfortunately. All right, so we are back to the 5-day-a-week schedule, of course. Thank you for tuning in today to Locked On Guardians. And make sure you subscribe to all of the platforms you can get podcasts, YouTube, so you get the latest episodes. If you never miss an episode of Locked On Guardians, the Everyday Club is built for you. Get Locked On Guardians ad-free and a members-only Discord access. Head to LockedOnGuardians.supercast.com to join the club. Tomorrow, pitching prospect tools draft. We will draft different tools of pitchers in the system, and we'll tell you who we like the most on tomorrow's show.
Thank you for joining us.